way the museum is focused on saving history is essentially by reaching out to the community and finding out what objects and also what stories are still available for us to collect and that we can properly care for within the space that we have.
The Clark County Historical Museum is viewed, well, a little bit as an unknown. People come in and they're like, wow, I had no idea this was here. It's been, we have to say, well, it's been here since 1909. Maybe not as a museum, but this building has been here forever and people still don't know. And when they get here, I think that it is not a typical museum. I think that they are blown away by the way that the exhibits are set up, the way that the museum interacts with the community through History on Tap, through our speaker series, through our walks. I think that it's really different for a historical museum because it's not just about the objects, it's about the stories.
I think one of the biggest challenges is that people don't understand how important what they have is. Often we hear, I'm not a leader, or my family wasn't important, when the reality is everybody who's been here has a story to tell that is important to how we've gotten to this place and who we're going to be in the future.
As we continue to move into the future as an institution, I think what we want to see, the institution grow into is to become a facilitator of the community story in a much broader sense, to understand and respect the fact that we're a museum and we have a building, but really break ourselves out into the community where we're working with different organizations, working with businesses, we're working with government entities to help them both save their story and understand the best ways to do that, and then also work with them to help communicate that and share the narratives that they have. And so we're really looking at beyond the walls of the museum while also respecting and honoring the fact that the building is an artifact in its own right and the objects we hold are very important and key to our mission.
Welcome to this month's Speaker Series presentation, Talking to the Stars, KVAN and the Music of the Clark County Fair. Brought to you by our series sponsors, the Historic Preservation Commission of Clark County and Wager Audio. Our mission here at Clark County Historical Museum is to gather, save, and share the stories and memories of Clark County. The Society has been performing this mission for over 100 years, and here at the museum we've been showing and sharing Clark County's history for over 50. The core way we share Clark County stories is through programming, exhibits, and events like this one. This year, the museum is asking the question, how did our community get to this place in time, and where are we going? It's a question many of us have asked over the last year as we've witnessed the historic events, from the global pandemic to the social, economic, and political changes that continue to change the landscapes of our lives. This question is central to this year's theme, our community, past, present, and future, which has inspired our slate of speakers and topics for both the Speaker Series and History on Tap. Before I introduce you to tonight's program, I want to let you know about some of the things happening here at the museum. We're going to be busy this summer. On Saturday, June 12th, we and Bike Clark County have teamed up to bring you the Amazing History Race. This marathon-inspired, family-friendly scavenger hunt has something for everyone and is the perfect opportunity to shake off the last of those indoor blues for Get Outdoors Day. Wander Clark County, our summer walking tour program, kicks off June 19th with a look at a perennial favorite, Officers Row. History on Tap returns in person to the Kick-It stage Thursday, June 17th with a look at the history of death and burial in the Pacific Northwest by Elizabeth Fournier, aka the Green Reaper. The Speaker Series will be back July 1st for our annual Celebrate Main Street. This year, we're in downtown Vancouver celebrating the many wonderful businesses and historic sites that make downtown Vancouver unique. In July, we have teamed up with 5 nonprofits to bring you a month of Friday Night Flicks. Each Friday for the month of July, one nonprofit will host an outdoor movie at the Port of Ridgefield. More information for Friday Night Flicks and all our programs this summer is available on our website, monthly newsletter, and social media. If you want to support us, there are 3 ways you can get involved. Your time by engaging with us online, in person, and attending our events. Your energy by volunteering with us. We have a lot of remote and now in-person volunteer opportunities available and can always use another set of hands. Or invest by becoming a member, sponsoring our programs and exhibits, or donating to us. And now for tonight's show. The Clark County Fair is well known for the many great musical guests it's attracted through the years. This month, Brad sat down with former KVAN radio personality Jeff Williams to discuss the music and events that he experienced during his time at KVAN. We want to again thank our season sponsors, the Historic Preservation Commission and Wager Audio, for their support. And now, on to the show.
So, Jeff, I want to thank you for coming and doing this interview for our first Thursday speaker series. I can't tell you how excited I am to talk about this history and KVAN. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Being here.
Thank you.
So, just to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did you end up in radio, and how did you end up at KVAN?
Well, it's a long story. I grew up in a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. And in a big market like that, you have a lot of really extraordinary radio talent. And you all have heard of Casey Kasem. Well, Casey Kasem had a show on Detroit radio that when I started listening to the radio, I was in 6th grade, I think, and started getting into the music, the top 40 stuff. Every day this one guy counted down the top 5 songs of the day, and I never missed that. But it was a major market, and a lot of these guys who've gone on to even more major, like Los Angeles and Chicago, were there at the time. So Casey Kasem was working the nights on WJBK, and I heard him, and I thought, that's nice, Casey at the mic. But he left to go to, I think it was Los Angeles, to do production. And the guy that replaced him was a guy named Tom Clay. Tom Clay played the hits like what we all wanted, but he was so funny, and he had so much fun. And I was just like, God, that's what I want to do. Can I do that? And that was how it all started. So I followed Tom Clay, and I followed Lee Allen, who was another guy that I really liked him just because they had fun. And here's a man, 35 years old, sitting in a room by himself, talking to himself, basically, and he's got an engineer who runs his board for him. But he takes his mic and he says, okay, now we're going to hear the spinning ashtray. And he spins his ashtray, puts a mic there. And it wasn't more music, it was just fun, and they would take through these little bits that I listen to them now, and it's kind of draggy, but in those days, that's what Top 40 radio was. It was personality oriented. So I decided when I was a senior in high school, I got a tape recorder for Christmas. And I went around taping everybody. And there was this LP that came out from a disc jockey in Seattle. And it was called You Be a DJ. And what he did was he had the music tracks there, and you filled in the blanks. And he had all these jokes you could use if you wanted to. And so I did that. I put all that stuff on tape. And I sat on my living room floor with one tape recorder and the other playing the music. And it was good, but it wasn't that great. So when I graduated from high school, I was starting to become driven just to get into radio. And they had a student station at the University of Michigan that I started at. And then I decided I better back off a little bit because my grades were going down and I needed to spend my time on that. But by the time I left Michigan, I was on the air back on that station. And I was able to be good enough that I could go in and make a check tape when I was home on leave from the Air Force. That's the consequence of not going to school in those days. You were apt to be drafted. So I went into the Air Force. They had a delayed enlistment thing, and I went in. And when I came back on leave, the guy let me get the key to the radio station. I went in and made a tape. And then when I got to my duty station in Merced at Castle Air Force Base, I went downtown knocking on doors. And this one station had an opening. They needed a guy to work all day Sunday. And so that's what I eventually did. I started working there, and then I got an Armed Forces Radio and TV, which I thought, I was a medic. That was my career field. I worked in a hospital and at Castle Air Force Base, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice just to do radio, and it was TV also, do that instead for a full day. Well, I went to remote Alaska for 13 months, and it was fun. I did, I did TV every night. I did sports, and then I did a countdown show, like the top 40 each week, and it was kind of fun. I enjoyed it. And then I came back, and 9 months later, I got out of the service. I headed west, ended up in New Mexico, worked there at a station. It was sold. And then after I was there 10 months, and I moved to Las Cruces and went to school there. I thought, I need to get a degree while I've got all this free time in my life. And so I loaded up on courses, got my degree, hit the road, and 3 years later, and headed down I-10, where it intersected with I-5. I went north, and 7,700 miles later, I realized, that was a long trip, and I got a job in Salem, Oregon. Stayed there for 4 years, went to Gresham for a couple of years, and then I wanted to get out of the situation in Gresham, and they had an ad in one of the magazines, the radio magazines, and it was an opening here at a station, KGAR. So I talked to the guy, came over and saw it, and long story short, he hired me. And the day after the Super Bowl in 1980, I started doing afternoon drive, doing sports play-by-play. And I was here from 1980 to the end of 1990, as it turned out. Lots of adventures along the way. I was a disc jockey, I was doing sports. And then probably one name that I will never forget is Susan Van Oudekirk. And the reason I remember her name was, when I was on the air being a disc jockey, we had a guy who had taken the place of a guy who was a pretty good news guy. They didn't have anybody waiting in the wings, and so he took over. He was a sales guy, basically. And she kept calling the station, wondering, he wasn't that great. And so she was working at a station in Eugene, and she was bird dogging every weekend. She'd call up and see how things were. Well, he left to sell advertising for mark-on signs, and so they called her, and she says, "Well, I can't come right now. I've got a boyfriend." So anyway, the program director comes to me and he says, "Okay, you're it." I says, "Okay." So I'm wearing, cut-off jeans, and I'm wearing tank tops to work, and all of a sudden, I go to the mall and I buy this new wardrobe of ties and shirts and suit coats and things like that. It was a whole different thing for me. But it was probably the best thing that ever happened. It was great to be at KVAN during this time. It was a wonderful job because I got to know the community, and I got to know how government works, which if you know how government works, you have a big advantage over people who don't. And I realized that. And I learned a lot along the way. And I was thankful to run into KVAN at that time. It was still KGAR when I got there, but the next year, it would be 1981 in August. They changed the call letters because they could. They changed the call letters to KVAN. It was KGAR, and they changed it to KVAN because, as they said, that's the name of this community's radio station. And the thing I liked about KVAN was it was Clark County centric. In other words, we didn't care what happened in Portland. We didn't care what people were doing down in Salem. We had people here to worry about, like the people up in Olympia and the city council and the county commissioners. And to me, that's where the action was, and that's what we made sure we covered those things. But there were a lot of things along the way, though. There were a lot of fun things, like the county fair and things like that were really fun to be part of.
Well, and so now, we're talking about the fact that you got to KVAN. There may be some people, because, KVAN obviously went away a little while ago, may not be aware of KVAN at all. So can you give us a little brief history of what KVAN was?
Yeah. KVAN was the station Willie Nelson used to work at. There was KVAN is, when you talk about call letters, you want to associate them with dials, where they are on the dial. And Ed Fisher, who was a PUD commissioner, who they called Mr. Electricity, I think, was on that commission for a long time, the PUD commission. He put KVAN on the air in 1939, and it was on the air on 9:10 a.m. at that time, and all the way through till 1959, I should say, 1959. And Kissin, KISN, took that dial position when they came on the air, and the new owner came in and changed the format to Top 40. And they went on to great success as a Top 40 station in this market. The guys who were on 910 put up a new radio station out east. They were KPVA was the name of the station, and they put it on 1480. So that's where KVAN went to, was 1480, which later became the infamous or progressive rock format, the Monomaniacs. And then when Gary Capps bought it, Gary Capps came from a radio family. His dad had a string of radio stations, and Gary thought he would like to get into. His brother owned the east side of Washington and Oregon, and he was in charge of the west side. So they owned a bunch of stations, and Gary came here, and he thought he just bought the station, and he thought, we'll be on Portland, and he found out the signal did not go into Portland. It got stopped at the river. And so that's when he decided that they were going to be a Clark County centric station. They would focus on local news, they would focus on local events, they would focus on local people. And they switched the format from a top 40 format to a country format because the research showed that they had to, people liked country. It was an agrarian economy pretty much back in those days. So that's what they did. They were located underneath the overpass there where all the train tracks are, in a little old house, and they moved it to the Avenida del Sol there on Gear Road near Fourth Plain. And they set up in there, and we had a little, a little satellite cinder block building near the transmitter, where the transmitter was. And that's where we did our shows. That's where our entertainment was. But the salespeople and all the office people were up the other place. They later merged that and put everything together there, and it stayed that way until 1989, until the station was purchased. And as we've said, as many people know, we were taken off the air and simulcasted with a FM progressive rock station in Portland. So that's kind of my history as I see it. And it was, everything just seemed to work. We were a country station until 1986, and then we noticed that all the FMs in Portland were playing country music, and they were getting the listeners, and so our reason for being a country station was kind of diminished. So we focused on the local news. We played soft rock, and what they used to call middle of the road, and that's what we did until we were dismissed, so to speak, in 1989.
So you were talking about that KVAN covered local events, and I think one of the ones that we've talked about the most was the Clark County Fair, which, everyone of many generations in Clark County know. And you actually had the opportunity to sit down with national musical artists and interview them, which I can imagine was just pretty thrilling. And so, tell me a little bit. We first one that we came across, because you've recently donated tapes to the museum, and then I talked about, and you actually sent it to me via email, was Charlie Daniels. So tell us a little bit about this Charlie Daniels interview that you were able to do.
Well, Charlie was very hot at the time he came here. In fact, one of the biggest days of the year in Clark County was when the fair had all the contracts signed, who was going to play at the Clark County Fair in the grandstand. That was one of the big events of the year. And you get all these major country acts and major pop acts, some of them too. So that was a big deal, and so Charlie was very big back then, and he had The Devil Went Down to Georgia was his biggest hit, and that was right about the time we had a chance to talk to him. And the way it was set up, we would sit there in the outside the grandstand watching the show, and then I would sort of meander on up as the show was ending, And then when they walked off the stage, I would go around the back side. There was a little trailer back there where they had food and stuff, and they could relax between shows. They did an afternoon show that ended about 3, and then they would come back on about 7 and do another show. And the afternoon shows weren't as widely attended as the evening shows were, because sometimes it was pretty hot, and people wanted to have fun at the fair, and so they'd come out about 5 or 6 and eat, and then they'd go to the show. So I'd be back there waiting, and Dolores Schmidt and Betty Harvey, who were the 2 gals in the little golf cart driving all over the place, and they would make sure that the stars, the celebrities, the entertainers would get everything they needed, food, drink, that kind of thing. And then they would usher me in, and I would sit down at a table with Charlie Daniels. And the biggest surprise with Charlie was that when he took his hat off, he had this bull rider's hat, big, kind of pointed at the top, kind of round. And when he took it off, I was so surprised that he had a flat head, just like everybody else. And but he was very warm, very caring. Charlie was kind of a rebel in country music. He played; it was almost like rock and roll that he was playing. And he took some interesting stands. The South's going to rise again, and songs like that. And so he had quite a reputation. And he was not a Grand Ole Opry kind of guy, but I'm sure he would have been welcome to go there. But part of my education with country music was understanding that there was originally back in the mid-'70s, there was a huge gap between the people who were traditional country artists and the new ones like John Denver and Olivia Newton-John, and eventually it all kind of came together. But in those days it was kind of it wasn't bitter, but it was just when I was playing music by one of the newer artists, people wouldn't like that. But as I say, country evolved, and it was great for all of us. So Charlie was sharing. I was saying, Charlie, I really like the energy in your music. I like how you approach things. You have a lot of energy that comes and sings in your lyrics. And tell me, how that works for you. And he told me. And then he basically got into some stories. All of my celebrity interviews had some great stories, because like they're doing with me, where did you come from, what did you do, and Charlie was great. He was very warm. He was a big man, and so I thought, I don't know, because sometimes big people have big egos, and that was the thing I always worried about doing these interviews, was the guy will have a big ego and he won't say anything when I ask him questions. But Charlie was great.
So that's interesting what you say about Charlie Daniels, because you mentioned kind of his songs, how they were viewed by people, and actually in the interview that you did with him, he mentions that his songs are seen by some as political, but they're not. And then also you talked about the stories. So what we're going to do is let's cue up 2 clips real quick from your interview with him, and let's take a listen on both of those points.
I would ask you a favor to ever attach the word political to our music, because I don't consider our music to be political at all. All of it is for fun. That's what we want to do, is make people have fun. That's why they come to see. But, if we get a chance to sing a song about something that has some meaning to it and it's a good song, then why not?
So another person, and this is kind of, I think, somewhat timely, is Country Charlie Pride. And we actually lost him last year, the musical artist. And it was very interesting because what was so amazing about the interview that I felt like you had with him was it felt very personable right off the bat. Like, you didn't necessarily know him, but you kind of asked him, like, hey, it looks like you lost some weight, and like you're having this kind of chatting conversation, and he was so warm, and he kept repeating your name over and over. And so I just want to kind of get your feel for what it was like to interview Charlie Pride.
It was wonderful. It really was. He went way out of his way to know my name. We chatted before we went on about an interview I had with Ray Stevens a couple of years ago. But he was very warm. He was very interested, in where I came from. He was a real person, And I've always liked his music because it was so sincere. And he had a tremendous voice. And he also played baseball. He'd go to spring training with the Texas Rangers or the Milwaukee Brewers or wherever he could latch on. He'd play in the outfield during spring training. But he was an entertainer. And he was just very warm, and like you say, he used my name a lot, and he wanted to make sure he got that right. And I've interviewed people in my past where they keep calling me Kyle or something, and I'm too polite to interrupt them and say, no, that's not my name. But Charlie was tremendous, and we did a very long interview with Charlie because he touched on a lot of things, not just country music, but just things about life. And I was very impressed by his dedication to his craft and the people he worked with too. He talked about all the great people he worked with. We talked about being in Vancouver, Clark County, because he had been there before, and he was just a tremendous joy just to talk to, because when you do an interview with someone you haven't done an interview with before, you want to make sure that things go smooth and that they're nice people and you come across as being nice, and that's basically how you get them to loosen up and just be themselves. And he was great. He was fantastic.
You were just talking about, Charlie Pride with the baseball connection, and I was really surprised to hear that. And so we've actually queued up a clip where he talks about where he goes and I guess participates in spring training with some of the baseball teams. It sounds like he just can kind of show up wherever he wants and hang out. And so let's take a listen to that clip real quick.
Started with the Brewers in 70 and 71, and of course we got our team in the Texas Rangers in 72. So I've been going with them since 72, and I was with them this year. I didn't get a chance to go for about 3 days with them this year, but hopefully next year.
So, we have the music exhibit here at the museum, and you're sitting in front of our Musicians of Note case, which one of the pieces of that is the musicians who went to the Clark County Fair, and we actually noted Johnny Cash as one of those people that came through there. And again, like with each of your interviews that you did at the fair for KVAN, it wasn't. There was interesting individual pieces like we had talked about already with Charlie Daniels and Charlie Pride, and with Johnny Cash, what I found really interesting was you mentioned the DARE program, and he talked about his recovery quite a bit, which I guess I just didn't expect to hear in an interview at the fair. And so tell us a little bit about what it was like to interview the Johnny Cash.
Well, with Johnny, and I think June was there too, how this all came about was Sheriff Frank Canacoa and Undersheriff Bob Songert came to me and they said, Johnny wants to talk about DARE. And I said, fine. So this wasn't anything we did after the concert. I went up to him in the middle of the afternoon, and actually it's more about evening. And we stood out in a field somewhere and just talked. And Johnny was very adamant about DARE and about getting kids off drugs. And and as you know, he had quite a serious drug problem himself, which is covered quite well by Ken Burns' documentary on country music. But he was, you could look in his eyes and he was kind of puffy skinned, and so you could see where some of the damage visually had done to him. But he was on fire, and he wanted people to get off drugs and get off them now. And that to me was just, I don't think June said too much. He was pretty much the show there. And he was just like half an hour before he was going to go on and play. But I was so impressed by the fact that he made himself a human being and said, I think I went through this. I can tell you how bad it is. And he said, that's why I'm so moved to get people off of drugs, especially kids. And so that to me, that was a great event, just being there with him and being part of that part of his life.
All right, and so, like we were mentioning, Johnny Cash wanted specifically to do the interview to talk about the DARE program. And so let's listen to that clip that you had with the interview with Johnny Cash.
I'm glad to be involved in that program anytime I can, because I've been there. I know that drugs can kill, and by all odds, I should have been dead long ago.
Okay, so another person that you had the opportunity to interview was Melvin Franklin, and you both had the Detroit connection, and it seemed like you guys you hit it right off. And he was just, with this big bass voice, was so warm and approachable. And so tell us a little bit about the interview with Melvin Franklin.
Well, that was one of my favorite interviews because I grew up listening to him. And the Temptations were a Motown group, as you may or may not know. And they and the Supremes, when Berry Gordy signed them up and started recording them, they had a whole list of songs that bombed. And they were called the Primes and the Primettes first. And then they called themselves the Supremes and the Temptations. He changed the name, but the results weren't the same. They were the same, I should say. And it was in 1964 when everything started to come together. The Supremes had a top 10 hit in the end of 63, and they had like 5 or 6 number 1 songs after that. And then the Temptations followed up behind them. And the first time they heard one of their songs on the air was in the summer of 1964. And Melvin says, we all got out of the car, we pulled off the road. It was on CKLW, which was a big Canadian station, which was a Detroit station too, but it had a huge signal. And they were just ecstatic that they were hearing their song on the air. And they got out of the car, they ran around the car 3 or 4 times, they jumped up and down, and then they got back in the car and went where they were going. But the funny thing was, I bumped into Melvin, a big tall man, and a big tall African American man, and I said, well, who are you? What are you doing here? And he said, I'm Melvin Franklin. I'm the bass singer of the Temptations. And he was very friendly. I mean, it was fun. And so when we even did the countdown, he helped me do it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But it was one of my favorite interviews because he was very opinionated about what happened at Motown. They left Motown and went to another label. And he said they weren't promoting him enough and were promoting the group enough. And except for David Ruffin, all the original Temptations were there that night. And they were great. And it was fun that night watching them perform on the stage. And all the people my age, this is 1985, which is about 14, 15 years after their last top 10 songs, they were all up and dancing. Everybody was dancing. And it was fantastic, and the music was great. And that was the same year we had the Everly Brothers come to the fair, and it was fantastic. And but that was probably one of my favorite interviews because it was a guy I knew and a group that I followed. And 1965, "My Girl" was a number 1 song, and you still hear it today on the radio. It's in heavy rotation on the oldie stations. So that was something. He was the last of the Temptations to pass. And but I cherish that interview. I really do. That was fantastic.
So another person you got a chance to interview was Loretta Lynn as she came through the Clark County Fair. And it was interesting because with Charlie Pride and a few others that you interviewed and you asked Loretta Lynn the same question, it seems country music was kind of changing at this time. And so you had this really fresh opportunity to ask the question on how she was kind of navigating that. So talk a little bit about your interview with Loretta Lynn.
Well, Loretta Lynn was a legend when she came to Clark County that time, that day, that year. And she and Conway Twitty had done these duets, which were just as big as their single records were. But the thing about the Loretta Lynn story, and it was made into a movie, The Coal Miner's Daughter, was the thing that was she was still singing the same kind of lyrics. And it was like she was very... And I think Ken Burns' video takes this, really explains this very well, how she was a woman and she was not going to let anybody push her around or tell her what to do or tell her what to think or tell her how to be. She loved her husband and he supported her, but she had all these opinions of what she could and wanted to do, and it was expressed in her music. I'm trying to think. "You Ain't Woman Enough to Take Away My Man" was one of her songs. And those of you who have followed Loretta Lynn know what I'm talking about. She was women's lib before there was women's lib, but she was a beautiful woman, and not that should make any difference, but she got dressed up and she was in makeup, and she had a fandom that was just incredible. When we finished our interview, which we did on her bus, we did it on her bus, and if you listen very carefully, if he turns the volume up, you can hear her kiss me on the cheek, but that's kind of irrelevant. But the thing that impressed me about her was, and a lot of country stars are this way, is she went outside, sat at a table under the hot sun, and talk to people. There probably were 90 to 100 people waiting in line to talk to her. And she talked and interviewed them and gave autographs on records or on any on a sheet of paper. She was very, very, very congenial. I used to think that sounds so corny, all about your fans. Well, she cultivated her fans. She took care of her fans. And she was there for her fans when they came there to see her. And I was very touched by that, how she would just sit out there and just go and go and go until they left. And that can be quite draining. And I guess the other thing about her show was, in our interview, that she had played, I guess it was, she made some comment earlier in the afternoon show, and the first show of the day, and made a comment about a Crisco commercial she recorded, and she thought she was recording it for Vancouver. She thought she actually, what it was, she thought she was in Vancouver, BC, and she had all these Canadian jokes and Canadian references and stuff. And then she started off the interview by apologizing for getting them mixed up, and that's it. That's okay. That happens all the time. So she was, but she was at ease, and she was friendly, and she was engaging, and well, like Charlie Pride. I mean, she just let herself be herself, and that's the thing about her career. She was always herself, always speaking her mind, and it wasn't in a sense of countering somebody. It's just how she felt. So she was the real thing.
So thank you. That's awesome. And so we're talking about Loretta Lynn, and you were talking about her kind of facing the new country that she was doing that, but also keeping the integrity of her style. So let's hear a little clip from that interview with her.
I would write a hit song and get down to the last 3 lines, and I'd start ripping it up. And this went on for 10 years. Now I'm back to writing, and ain't nobody gonna stop me.
So obviously there's the musical artists that you interviewed at the fair, but then there's also these tapes that you have of just the general fair itself, and it sounded like a really fun place, and like you guys were actually having a really good time. So talk a little bit about just being out there at the fair and recording folks.
Well, it was fun because everybody was having fun, and instead of spending all day at the radio station, I got to spend it out there taping interviews. And it wasn't just the celebrities, it was the barns and the places where the animals were, and where the young kids from the 4-H were grooming them or washing them or cleaning them or talking to them, or they would get them to talk to me into my microphone. And there were these generations, kids in high school in the 4-H, or really young kids in the 4-H, and all the people who were farmers and agrarians, people who worked in agriculture, and all the granges were out there, and there were the guys with the old machinery. It was just a great diversity of generations. It really was, and it was fun to see them every year. That's why it was cool. After doing it for 10, 15 years, I was able to get out there and see my friends, and that was the only time that I ever saw most of them to begin with. But they were awesome, and I heard a tape, and you will too probably, of Imogene Woodside. I mean, it took me right back to the Dairy Women's booth and the peach milkshakes. And if you haven't been there or you don't know about it, that was why people came there. It was for the peach milkshakes. And Imogene and the Dairy Women, it was awesome. The hours they would put in, the amount of peaches they would cut up, and it was people like her and all the different superintendents at all the barns. We have an interview with her son, who was in the horse barn where they clean up after the horses. You know what that means. And they were working with the kids in the 4-H who were there, and just help. And the kids didn't see it as work; they saw it as fun. And they saw it as something that they were probably already doing or were going to be doing. And the thing I remember most is the fact that when I first came here, there were 212 dairy farms. And these people live lives like most people don't live. They are up at 5 o'clock in the morning milking the cows. and they're back again before dinner or after dinner, milking them before they go to bed. As time went on, they had the automatic milkers that helped a lot, but they had to be out there. They had to get up and get things ready and get the animals ready. And I was always impressed by their lifestyle. I mean, this is 7 days a week you work like this. And then they come to the fair and it's even more time. So I was, the whole thing about the people, especially the dairy farmers who put in all that kind of time because they had to, was just extraordinary for me.
So in addition to, the Clark County Fair stuff that we've covered a lot too, you also did sports. So tell us a little bit about your sports coverage.
Well, when I got there, they hired me to do the play-by-play and the on-the-air sportscasts. And so one of the first things I did was high school football. Now, I had done high school football back when I was in Merced in California, and things changed. They didn't have the T formation anymore. And my sidekick, Gary Gurman, who used to be an Evergreen coach, was a guy who could really help me. And he was a teacher at Evergreen. And I would go up and he would show me these films, especially of Tony Alvarado, who was he was the player of the year, the Parade Player of the Year, Parade magazine. And he ended up going to the University of Washington from there. But Mr. Alvarado was a single wing, like a run and shoot kind of offense, which I didn't know what that meant. So Gary would show me these films and show me where people stood and what they did, and that was, for me, that was very helpful. And I was able to go up into the press box and get the names, and I knew the names and the numbers of the players, watch them work out, and get to know them. And a lot of them went on to major colleges to play. In fact, I remember, I'm trying to remember his name now, Bruce, the guy who's the coach now at Portland State, the football coach. He was a linebacker at Columbia River. And you see these kids growing up and having businesses, becoming attorneys and doctors. And to me, that was awesome. That was an awesome part of it. But I also did, and you'll hear some things that I did pregame interviews that I pre-taped with the coaches of the teams we were going to play. And then as those were playing, I was racing to find the football field and get up there in time to take it live, which my first time to Kiggins Bowl almost became a disaster, and I had to stop at a minute mark and tell me, how do I get there from here? I got to be there in 5 minutes, And as it turned out, I got there in time, and I never forgot how to get there. But that was a lot of fun, and there was a coach for Hudson's Bay, Hugh Wyatt, his name was, and Hugh had been a coach for the USFL, Philadelphia Bell, and he was coming to high school to teach high school kids how to play. And I ran onto the field after a game, and I wanted to interview this young man who had had a fantastic game, and Hugh would not let me. And he said, he says, they have to settle down. They have to go into the locker room, and they have to just sort of chill a little bit before they would do that. And so you don't see that anymore. The players, after they take a shower in professional sports, are right out there taking hits from the people interviewing them. But I never wanted to be nasty or anything. I thought it was awesome what they were doing. And we had some people come out of there and go into professional sports. And like I say, a lot of the community leaders, business leaders, teachers, it was pretty impressive the way it came out. Now, the other things I followed, when I was doing sportcasts, anytime a local kid from Vancouver or Clark County was playing for a major league team, I would always tell how they did, how many at bats they had, how many home runs they had, RBIs, and they were just people that I thought we needed to be in touch with. One of the biggest successes, and probably one of the biggest stars to come out of local sports, is Randy Myers. Randy was the son of a welder who said he would probably have been a welder if he hadn't caught on to sports. And he had a coach at Clark College, Vern Kinsfather, who converted him from a first baseman, which he was when he played at Evergreen High, converted him into a pitcher. And Randy became a great pitcher and won a ton of games. He was a relief pitcher, so he was always a guy that had to hold the lead. And he was one of the co-MVPs of the 1990 Cincinnati Reds. And he started with the New York Mets, who drafted him. And when he went to spring training, I'd always do a special show with him, a 30-minute show about how he's doing, what he's looking for, what he hopes to do or hopes to work on in spring training. And we did three of those shows. And that was kind of cool, just being able to be there in his venue or get what it was like for him. And we got to be pretty good friends. I'd see him at Green Meadows. He worked out at Green Meadows, and he was randy. You know, that was the other good thing. He was randy. And so it was nice knowing him and being involved in his issue. Brian Hutter was the other one that got to know his mother, and she provided access so we could talk to him. The Seattle Mariners, as you may remember, there was a baseball strike in 1994, and they were still on strike when it was supposed to start in 1995. Well, they finally got an agreement, and they opened the season on a Sunday, the 5th of April, as I remember. And I got a press pass to go in and talk to all the players. So I just went from player to player to player to player. Ken Griffey Jr. was there, as you may remember. Lots of players. Just what's it like? How's it feel to finally be playing after the strike? And I got some good tape from those guys. So that was kind of neat. And then as time wore on, there were just all kinds of people that opportunities to. Randy Myers had these dinners and these clinics where he would invite all these major league players to come, and I got some good audio from those back in the late '90s, I guess it was, or the middle '90s. So it was fun. It was fun to do sports. It really was, and I was just glad to be able to be part of that and get the sound that I needed to be able to take it home with me and play it on the air.
We're just getting ready to wrap up for our interview, and just hearing about all the stuff that you were able to cover, the fair, and you were able to cover sports, and like there was local events that we had talked about in another setting that we had just so many things that this Clark County centered radio really covered. It just makes me think, like, what do you feel, or what do you think Clark County lost? What does it mean to Clark County having KVAN radio?
Well, I've thought about this for a while, and one of the things about a radio station, to be able to operate, it has to make money. And KVAN never really made a lot of money from its Clark County situation, which it started being a Clark County radio station from 1977. And then in 1998, the new owners who took over the station after Dick Granger sold it to them went up 50,000 watts, which made it just another big station and not a Clark County station. Clark County's 1/3 of the metro, and so you can't really ignore the other 2/3 if you're spending money, and it costs money for electricity alone for having those kind of connections. So I think KVAN was a special place, a special station, and a special time. There are no jobs in radio anymore, very few. Radio is what people say is a dying platform. People are getting their information in other ways, and they're learning about how things operate without using radio or TV. And the thing about KVAN, it was in an umbrella market. So we were on the outside of the inner core, which was Portland. They had TV stations and radio stations. And so we did our best to say geography means something. The fact that we're isolating this one space, this one place, at this one particular time allowed KVAN to do what it did. That would not be possible now. So I think it's just like everything else in life, it changed. Things changed. And I regret that KVAN's not around, and I regret that all the hard work people put in, hopefully what you'll see here is going to kind of show that. But for me, it was a chance to really have fun, and these were the best years of my life in radio.
Well, Jeff, I can't thank you again for saving the history and the recordings that you've provided and donated to the museum. I know we had our conversation. I told you you made my millennium when you called me last week to tell me what you had, and I can't even thank you even more for just sitting down and talking with me about this, because knowing what this meant to you and what it was like to be a part of this history, it means so much to us, and it helps us understand the interviews and all of the materials that you provided. So thank you so much for doing this and willing to share this with everybody out in the community.
I just want to say that I am just overwhelmed that, just like when I was working here, people were interested and wanted and appreciated what I did. And I thought, what better way to pay them back for that than giving it back to them? And so for me, this has been fantastic. I've been able to find the tapes we need to tell the story, and we're not complete, but it tells a story of what KVAN was in a special 15-minute window, 15-year window of time. So thank you, Clark County, and thank you, KVAN.